What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is of course a continuation where I focus on Academy Award Best Picture winners ranked worst to best per decade. I've done 1920s, 1980s, but guys, you clicked on this video, you know it. This time around I'm doing 1990s Academy Award Best Picture winners ranked worst to best. And this time I'm joined by Carlos of Misfit. Misfit is a very good channel. I've been following him for I believe it's like 3 years or so, but he's done analysis videos. His analysis video of Moonlight is actually what really got me to say, hey, let me watch this a second, third, and now obviously multiple times since then. And not only does he do analysis videos, but he also does art house reviews, independent movies, and he'll do, occasionally mainstream movies. But I really like his videos. I highly urge you guys to check his videos out. He's a really good reviewer, and I am very happy to have him join today to do this video. So basically what the structure of this video is going to be is that he's going to give his number 10 to 6. I'll then give my 10 to 6. He'll then give his 5 to 1. I'll give my 5 to 1, and then we'll wrap it up. So all that exposition aside, let's get started. Carla, take it away.
What's going on, everybody? So obviously, first things first, huge shout out to Sabourin. He reached out to me to do a collab, and I have never done a collab before on YouTube. So this is something completely new to me, and I hope you guys enjoy it. But yes, obviously I'm going to be giving you my ranking of all the Best Picture winners from the 1990s. But before I really get into this list, I just have a few things to say. I actually hadn't seen 7 of these films before. So I've basically heard about all of them, except for The English Patient. I had never heard about that film up until now. 7 of these films I'd never seen before, and let me tell you something. A lot of this was actually kind of a task for me to get through. I mean, there were some that I was kind of surprised by and I actually found myself enjoying. But then there were a few in here that were just painful because they were just really long. A lot of these were really long, by the way. I think like at least half of these are 2.5 hours to 3 hours long. But there was just some of these films I just found absolutely painful. And they weren't painful, they were just painfully mediocre. But I can at least say that I enjoyed at least most of these films, and some of these films I've loved for a long time, and it's pretty cool to actually slightly talk about them, because I'm not going to really go in depth. I'm not going to give like an in-depth review of all these. I'm just going to kind of give like a quick 2 to 3 minute kind of summary of my feelings and then move on. But either way, let's just get right to it. Let's start this ranking at obviously number 10. And at number 10, we got Shakespeare in Love. This was obviously one of those films that I thought was absolutely painful. This film was so bad. It's honestly probably one of the worst films that I've ever seen. And, obviously it's competently produced. Like, everything looks professional. But it was just so incredibly bland and so obviously artificial and manufactured that it was impossible for me to actually feel invested and actually get into this film. And even beyond that, like, there's films that, are obviously Oscar baity and are obviously like manufactured for a more general appeal. But this one just felt so incredibly shameless about it. And the execution was like so lazy, and they didn't even really try to be clever with it. And when it comes to the romance in this film, which is a crucial part of the film, it never really cares to give you any reason to feel this connection between Shakespeare and Gwyneth Paltrow's character. I don't even remember the name of her character. It's like this film was just like, oh yeah, it's Shakespeare, so therefore you have to automatically care about everything that's happening. And it just never really cared to actually give the audience anything to latch onto. There was hardly any characters in this film that felt like, standout personalities and had actual charisma to them. Surprisingly, Ben Affleck's character, who I was dreading in this film, actually had the most personality, and he was hardly in this film, but he actually stood out as a character, and he was actually one of the more funner aspects of the film. I will say, like, the third act isn't so horrible. Like, the third act is doable and it's serviceable. And also the Queen character, played by Judi Dench, she was solid in the role. But this film was just so lifeless, so soulless, and I really, really could not stand the film. And the score is awful too. Like, the score just kind of lingers throughout the whole film, and there's no sense of direction, and there's no sense of vision. And just the fact that it also beat out Saving Private Ryan, which, by the way, is like, there's no possible way that a bunch of film experts actually thought this film was better than Saving Private Ryan. There is no legitimate way. It's really obvious that Harvey Weinstein just paid a bunch of people off, and that's how it happened. Because this also won 7 Academy Awards, which is just absolutely insane, and I think is just straight blasphemy. It won cinematography somehow. Like, cinematography? The cinematography in this film is just so by the book, so conventional. I don't even know how that happened. Again, Harvey Weinstein just paid some motherfuckers off. Anyway, that's number 10. I talked way too much about it, but I just kind of had a rant about this one because I really did not like this film. It was quite a painful watch, and I hope to never, ever watch this film ever again in my life. Alright, so moving on to number 9. Number 9 is Titanic. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Titanic is a horrible movie or is that painful of a movie to get through, but it is excessively long, and it really does not need to be that long. I think you could have cut this film in half and built up the same amount of tension and told the same exact story, and it would have been just fine. And even beyond that, like, I think the only reason why people really love this film so much is, like, well, first of all, I guess the romance worked for some people. It works somewhat. Like, I think it has some things going for it. But I think the real reason is because it's a huge spectacle type of film, and James Cameron is really good at marketing that kind of stuff. For me, like, it just needs a lot more than that, because there's a lot of things about this film that just don't work. Like, I just think it's a really corny movie that aged terribly. And sure, like, I feel kind of something in the end, because obviously it's being really manipulative and it's really trying its best to pull your heartstrings there at the end. But there's no denying that it is really corny, really cheesy. The score that's throughout this film is just so overbearingly bad. Even though I like the song separately. Like, I think Celine Dion's song Separately is a nice song, but the way that it's used throughout this film so repetitively, it's really painful sometimes. But either way, Titanic, number 9. I don't know, if I were to rate this film, I'd probably give it like a 5 out of 10 maybe, which is pretty generous. By the way, I didn't give my rating for Shakespeare in Love. Shakespeare in Love is probably like a fucking like 1 or a 2 out of 10 to be honest. I guess a 2 out of 10 to be generous. So moving on to number 8, we have The English Patient. So The English Patient, like I mentioned at the beginning, is a film that I actually didn't even know existed up until now. I was just scrolling through 90's Best Picture winners, and The English Patient came up, and I was like, okay, I've never heard of this, but I guess I have to watch it now. And I saw that I was 2 hours and 40 minutes, and I was like, God damn it. Now I gotta sit there with 2 hours and 40 minutes of a film that is probably really Oscar baity and not very good. But here's what I'll say about The English Patient. I don't think it's that great, but I think it's at least average. Like, I think there are some effective moments in this film. I think the romantic tragedy that's presented in this film was effective overall. But, you know, from a filmmaking perspective, like, again, this feels really manufactured. It feels pretty bland overall. It's very by the book. It kind of goes back and forth between, past time and present time. And there are moments where I'm just like, oh, like, it just became kind of tiring to see it go back and forth so many times. And it just feels like a film that, again, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes long, but it doesn't need to be that long at all. You could probably cut the runtime in half and essentially get the same impact out of it. So, yeah, it has a great cast, by the way. You got Ralph Fiennes, Willem Dafoe, Juliette Binoche. She is easy on the eyes, to say the least. Kristen Scott Thomas is also in this film, so which I honestly, it's kind of hard not to see her in the Only God Forgives bitch mother role. But yeah, the cast is fantastic. But, like, again, this film just feels bloated and definitely Oscar bait type shit. It definitely had some effective moments, but should it have beat Fargo? Hell to the no. I think Fargo exceeds far better in a lot of different areas. It's a lot more creative film. It's definitely not trying to be this crowd-pleasing, general audience appeal type film. And there's just a lot more to appreciate out of Fargo, so... but obviously The English Patient is the safe film to pick, so that's probably why they picked it. But anyway, that's all I gotta say about The English Patient. If I were to give it a rating, I'd probably just give it a 6 out of 10. Just barely passable film, but I'm probably never gonna rewatch this film because it's just overly long. and it's really not worth sitting through all that time. Alright, so moving on to number 7. So this is where we're actually getting to what I would consider to be at least solid films. And this number 7 pick, it was actually quite a surprise because I went into this honestly expecting to hate it, as I did honestly a lot of these films, because a lot of them just seem really, again, just kind of manufactured for the Oscars. But number 7, we got Braveheart. Braveheart was a film that, just like I said, I was kind of going into it, wanted to tear it apart, but I actually enjoyed most of it. I will say, like, maybe the first 30 minutes was kind of a snooze fest, and again, it just felt really just by the book and not interesting. But then, like, you know, the conflict picks up, and the motives start to really come together, and the battle sequences in this film, I think, are incredible. And, you know, for Mel Gibson to act and direct this film is a pretty difficult task considering how big the scope is. And I think overall this film is effective. And overall, I enjoyed watching it. I was surprised. I went into this thinking, oh God, again, pretty much a 3-hour film that I'm going to have to sit through that I'm not going to enjoy. But I actually ended up enjoying it. Again, I don't know if it needed to be 3 hours long. You probably cut a decent chunk of it out. But overall, like, I enjoyed this film. I think Mel Gibson is pretty solid in the lead role. Could his accent be a little bit better? Sure. But overall, I was impressed by how much I actually enjoyed it. So, yeah, that's why it's number 7. I mean, if I were to give it a grade, I'd probably give it a 6.5 or a very flaccid 7. So number 6, we have Unforgiven. So Unforgiven is a film that I think a lot of people maybe expected to be higher up on the list. But don't think that I didn't enjoy this film. I actually really did quite enjoy this film. I think there's a lot about it to appreciate. And, you know, this is also directed by Clint Eastwood, starring Clint Eastwood. And he's great in this film. Like, again, this is kind of somewhat of a different approach to the earlier Clint Eastwood films where he, you know, plays this kind of obvious badass kind of character. Which, don't get me wrong, he does in this film. But, like, a big part of this film was really interesting because it kind of revolves around, like, breaking the myth of this kind of, like, Superman cowboy type character. And I liked that overall thematic approach in this film. And I think the finale is really engaging and really interesting too. But, like, again, like, I just think it's, like, there's nothing really special about the direction. There's nothing that special about the writing. But I think maybe the writing of the characters and the acting is really solid, and the thematic approach I think is really solid. So yeah, I had a pretty good time with this film, and I honestly need to watch more Clint Eastwood films. There's a lot of Clint Eastwood films that I haven't seen, so I really need to get on that. But yeah, this is a pretty solid film. If I were to rate it, I'd probably give it a 7 or a 7.5. But anyway, that's my 10 through 6. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it back to Chad.
All right, Carlos, thank you for your number 10 to 6. So I'm going to start things off with my number 10. My number 10 is Forrest Gump. Hadn't seen this movie in 8 years. Figured I would give it a rewatch. 8 years ago, I thought this movie was solid. Wasn't a big fan of it, though. So upon rewatch, what do I think? I thought this movie was quite disappointing. All the issues I had as a 16-year-old, I thought would kind of, like, you know, brush aside, and that I would appreciate it more. But instead, those got amplified in those 8 years. I think that the portrayal of women is really kind of offensive, I think. More importantly, the messages about how you just gotta, to get through life, you just gotta listen to authority, and you'll get lucky by just going through and stumbling through events in life. You know, I don't know. Like, I just feel like it's very propaganda-like. I feel like this is a movie that, like, a boomer will watch and say, yeah, this movie's so good. Like, you know, yeah, man, Forrest Gump. And it's kind of like, okay, but Forrest Gump got lucky in life. You know, not everyone has that privilege of getting lucky in life. And I just feel like seeing a character such as this do that is kind of alarming, especially when this movie is very, very well received for the most part. You know, I feel like a lot of people that say they don't like Forrest Gump are looked at as hipsters. I don't look at it as that. I just look at it as people that are kind of like, you know, opening their mind to see, like, that this isn't actually, like, a good movie, in my opinion. Now, again, the messages and the actual dealing with female characters. That's something that, might not be alarming to other people. Now, I could talk about the filmmaking. I think that the acting is fine. What I will say is that the story is a bit too syrupy, as is the romance is a bit too surface-based for my liking. The ending is also kind of like really angry driven for me personally. Like I personally get really angry when I watch that ending, because I just feel like a character gets used, and I feel like this is a movie that people watch and say, yes, like incels. I feel like we'll watch this movie and say, yeah, all women are like this. And it's kind of like, no, that's not true at all. Like, not all women do that. And to see a movie like this that's well received to do that, it's so alarming for me personally. And also, this movie takes back feminism 100 years. I know I said I was going to stop, but once I start, I can't stop. What can I say? The pacing is disjointed. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Forrest Gump. I'm really not. What can I say? Let's move on to the next one. My number 9 is The English Patient. Also hadn't seen this movie in quite some time. I think it was like 6 years ago I saw it. So this was my second viewing that I saw in preparation for this video. The first time I saw it, I thought it was solid. I gave it like the same rating as Forrest Gump. But just like that movie, it didn't age well for me. All these years later, the issues I had were amplified. The pacing is very sluggish. Very, very sluggish. Especially in the second half. The romance, it's kind of hard to buy, I feel like. And that's something that you'll kind of realize with some of these winners. It's kind of hard to buy. Do I like the score? Do I like the cinematography? For sure. Do I think the acting is good? Yeah. But I think that the length, pacing, editing, there are a couple choices which are pretty cool, but I think overall those are things that just really dampened the whole move for me. I also just, again, feel like the story itself isn't as interesting as one might think. But again, if someone says that they like The English Patient, I respect that. I mean, I have a review up for The English Patient. It has over 1,000 views, and there are many comments that are saying how much they love the movie. Okay, that's fine. I just personally have realized upon second view that I didn't like it. Fargo should have won Best Picture, and for Forrest Gump, I forgot to mention, I think Shawshank Redemption or Pulp Fiction should have won. That's just me. So that was my number 9. My number 8 is a movie I actually own, and that's Freedom. Yeah, Braveheart. So I've only seen Braveheart twice. Similar to the other two movies I mentioned, I rewatched it a couple of years ago, actually, I will say. But the thing is, Braveheart, I feel like I appreciate the technical aspects more than the other two movies I mentioned. I really, really love the cinematography. I love the score. I think the battle scenes are very well staged. I think the performances are fine. The costume design, the makeup, everything in those regards is really good. I do think the directing is very bumpy in the first half. I think that you can definitely tell it's a first-time director with that first half. Like, you could easily skip the first 45 minutes or so and then just watch the remaining 2 hours. Because the remaining 2 hours, it is a spectacle for sure. What I will say, though, is the build-up and the overall reasoning for this all to happen, the motivation is kind of alarming. Again, all this occurs because of, obviously William Wallace's wife, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but with what happens to her, it's the driving force of the movie. It's basically a revenge tale, and you get why he's doing this, but I feel like in the final act, he does something where it's kind of like reverting all that back, and it's kind of like, well, bro, you did all this because of this, but then you're doing this, like, what? Also, the movie's not historically accurate in the slightest, and I know in some cases it's like, oh, that doesn't really matter, but I feel like there's certain things that they do, again, it's interwoven with the romance and, the motivation I mentioned, it's kind of like baffling to me personally. Do I respect the movie on a technical aspect? For sure. As a whole, I do think the movie is problematic, but again, I own it because I just kind of realized, it does have some pretty cool stuff in it. Although, again, albeit it is a flawed movie. So that's my number 8. My number 7 is Dances with Wolves, which, again, I've only seen twice. I rewatched it in preparation for this video as well, and I liked it better. I liked it a lot better the first time. The first time I saw it with my parents, and they personally really did not like the messages, about like Native Americans, because in their eyes, I was like, yeah, but Native Americans also did a lot of bad stuff. But all these years later, 8 years I should say, I realized that, something, in terms of the politics of this movie, I 100% agree with the politics of this movie. There are, again, instances in life, especially in American history, where they don't fully flesh things out and showcase that, something, you're demonizing the enemy, but, you know, for every enemy, there is people that are both good and bad on both sides. That's just how it is. Do I wish Dances with Wolves fleshed out both sides a bit more, showing that there were good white guys and bad ones as well, that there are good Native Americans and bad Native Americans? For sure. But that's something, I can't change. The movie came out when it came out. But overall, I do like the messages of the movie. I think the messages are quite impactful. There are some pretty emotional scenes, especially with the score, the cinematography. The acting is really good too. Kevin Costner gives a really good performance. And just, again, overall, the representation for this movie is something that it's admirable. It really is. And it's a Western that, again, it's not my favorite Western for sure, but I do think it's a solid movie. The length can be a bit, bearing to get through, but again, it is worth it overall in the end. And yeah, again, I would say this is a movie that is, again, I wish that they fleshed out both sides a bit more and showing the good and bad of both sides. But, you could always watch The New World, the Terrence Malick movie, to get that. But if you just want like a spectacle that has a nice message, I say watch this movie. It's a fine movie for sure. So that was my number 7. My number 6 is Titanic. So Titanic is a movie that my perspective changed a lot on. You watched my review from 5 years ago. I was not a big fan of it. I gave it like a 3.5 out of 5, which 5 years ago for me, that meant I was conflicted about it. I decided to rewatch it. I think it was like October, because I was like, you know what? I watched it on like an iPod, like very small iPod. It was a cracked screen. Let me decide to like rewatch this movie, and I did. I watched it on Blu-ray, and I was like, wow, this is actually a good movie. And I feel like it's important for critics to be able to say when they're wrong, when their perspective has changed, I should say. And for me, my perspective definitely changed on this movie. I think that this is a very well-crafted movie. I think that the romance works for me personally. It didn't before, but a lot's changed from when I first saw this movie, like 17, 18, between now. And I think it's important to be able to say that. I think that it's important to be able to say that, things in life change. Sometimes you look at things differently. And I have with this movie. I think that the technical aspects are amazing. The cinematography, the score, the score is just beautiful. But that mixed with the soundtrack, those two are very elegant, very delicate in that its approach. Visual effects, the practical effects are just amazing. They hold up to this day. The way it sounds, the sound mixing is also amazing. Makeup, the production design. There's just a lot to appreciate this movie. I cared about the characters too. Is it a simple story? Yes, but I do like the whole modern day aspect in the beginning and the ending. I do think that gives some levity to the whole situation. And more importantly, the 3 hours and 20 minutes, I do think that this is one of those movies where it's long, but it doesn't really feel long because you feel comfortable. You feel as though you're in the hands of a master. And James Cameron, I think he did a good job with this movie. That's why it's my number 6. So that being my number 6, I'm going to give it to Carlos, so he can give his number 5 to 1. Take it away, Carlos.
How are you going to do Forrest Gump like that, Chad? Forrest Gump is a national treasure. Anyway, I don't want to give away the spot on the list, but just know it's coming soon. So moving on to number 5, we have Dances with Wolves, which is directed and starring Kevin Costner. So again, this is kind of one of those films that I went in not really expecting much, because I don't find Kevin Costner to be that engaging or charismatic as an actor. And I was thinking, well, if he's not very engaging or charismatic as an actor, just imagine his directing. I'm sure it's bland. And in a way, I guess you could say it is. But I do think that I enjoyed this film a hell of a lot more than I expected. Because sure, there might be not anything too special about the camera work, even though there are some pretty shots in this film, but it's not like there's a real personality behind the camera. Like, this is, again, a really conventionally crafted type of film. But other than that, I think this film actually offered a lot more than I expected. I really, really enjoyed the dynamic between Kevin Costner's character and the natives in this film. I think that there was actually a lot of touching things about it, and I think it's also a rather important film as well. Even though it is kind of clearly that kind of Oscar bait film, and I obviously have issues with it, like the narration. I think the narration when he's kind of like reading out his diary is tiresome and really expositional to the point where it just feels like an excuse to just give audience information. But overall, I think this film has a lot of spirit. There's a lot of emotion in this film. Honestly, there's one scene in particular involving a wolf that got me teary-eyed and got me more than I expected. And it's just good writing. I'm not sure if I would really rewatch this film anytime soon or anything, but this is a film that I'm glad I watched and I think offered a lot more than I expected. So yeah, I think this film has a lot of heart. And if I were to give it a grade, I'd probably give it like a high 7 or even a low 8, but I guess more of a high 7. But do I think it deserved to beat Goodfellas? Hell to the fucking no. Goodfellas is a 10 out of 10 film and definitely did not deserve to beat out Goodfellas. But I can obviously see why the Academy picked this. Again, it's more of an important film. It's a safer film choice. It's not really controversial. Goodfellas would definitely be a more controversial pick. So moving on to number 4. This one is probably going to ruffle some feathers. There's probably going to be some big disagreements between a lot of people, because I know there's a lot of people that actually despise this film, and apparently we learned that Chad really does not like this film. But Forrest Gump is my number 4. I really, really love this film. And this is a film that, I'm going to be honest, I loved back when I was a young kid, when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. This is a film that I've seen so many times growing up. And, there are some films that I watched as a teenager and as a kid that I can easily say when I'm watching as an adult, it just isn't very good. But Forrest Gump, I can't say that. I really, really like Forrest Gump. I mean, granted, I can see why people don't like it. Because obviously, yes, it reeks of Oscar bait and has this kind of manufactured general appeal type approach to it. But I just can't help it. I feel like even after all these years, it still remains to have a lot of heart, a lot of charm, and Tom Hanks' performance as Forrest Gump is incredible. And I just think that he embodied this role incredibly well. And I think it's a really well-written film on top of that. It's really well directed too. And again, there's not anything too flashy about the direction, but I think the way this film flows and is able to tell its story is really impressive, because I think a lot of this obviously can come off just okay, how is that even possible? You kind of have to suspend your disbelief, and you still do, obviously. But I think it achieves a good way of tricking you into just kind of rolling with the story and buying everything that's happening. And yeah, again, I'm not saying this film is flawless. Obviously, this film has a lot of issues, but I think this film just has a lot going for it, and it just has so much heart. And it's really funny. I think this film is fucking hilarious. And there's a lot, pretty much a lot of the comedy works. I forgot to mention when I was talking about Shakespeare in Love, the comedy in that film just falls flat almost literally 90% of the time there was some sort of comedic attempt, it would just fall flat because it just seemed like there was no charm, there's nothing behind it. There was nothing clever about it. It was just there to it was a shameless attempt to try to make the audience laugh. Forrest Gump to me is not like that. I think the vast majority of the comedy attempts in this film really work. And I will always argue my love for this film because I think it's just a really well-made film. Tom Hanks is great in it. And I really, really like Forrest Gump, guys. I'm sorry. If I had to rate it, I'd give it, objectively, I would give it probably an 8 or an 8.5 out of 10. Sorry, I said it. I know some of my Kino Lord subs probably lost a lot of respect for me, but I know we have some Forrest Gump lovers out there. If you love Forrest Gump, I want to hear you say it in the comment section. Come on, it's okay. I know in this kind of film world, it's shameful to say that you like Forrest Gump, but it's okay. I'm giving you permission. We'll stand together as Forrest Gump stands, and everything will be right in the world. I love Forrest Gump. I think it's a great film, but I do not think that it deserved to win over Pulp Fiction. I'm not going to go there and say that. I think Pulp Fiction obviously should have been the clear winner there. It just shows a lot more creativity. So coming in at number 3, we have Schindler's List. Schindler's List is one of those films that was obviously a necessity for me to watch, but I just never got around to it, and I think it's because of the length. Sometimes I can be really hesitant to watch movies that are 3 hours plus, but I knew that going into this film that it would deliver on a lot of fronts because I've heard nothing but great things about this film. A lot of people say that this is Spielberg's masterpiece, and honestly, after watching it, I can definitely see why. This film has a lot of vision to it, and it really, really well captures the tragedy of World War II, and also just the sadistic, brainwashed nature of Nazi Germany. And I think that this film shows that Spielberg really went somewhere deep within himself and said, hey, I can make a film that is really raw and a film that, you know, isn't just trying to be a crowd pleaser. In a lot of ways, this film has some really unforgiving moments. There was a few moments where I was just like appalled that he went that far with. And even beyond that, I think it's just directed incredibly well. I like the black and white choice that's chosen throughout this film. It gives it a more authentic and somber feel to it. And Liam Neeson's also really good in this film too. I thought he did great in his role. And oh my God, Ralph Fiennes. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his last name, but I'm rolling with that right now. His character in this film was so aggravating because he's just so goddamn deplorable that it really makes some scenes pretty hard to watch. But overall, I think this is a really moving film, really tragic film, incredibly emotional, and I think Spielberg really achieved a lot with this. So yeah, if I had to give Schindler's List a grade, it would probably be like a 9 out of 10, or, you know, strong 9, like a 9.5 or something. So moving on to number 2, we have The Silence of the Lambs. So The Silence of the Lambs is a film that I've seen a lot of different times. I've started watching this film when I was a teenager, around 13, 14, and it was definitely one of the darker films that I've seen at the time. And even till now, it still holds up really well. And honestly, like, the fact that the Academy picked Silence of the Lambs for Best Picture is mind-blowing. Like, did Harvey Weinstein just not have enough money to pay people off? Or did he not have a film there that he could, like, push? I don't know what happened, but it was really, really cool to see the Oscars actually pick a film, a horror film. I think The Silence of the Lambs, it may not be the only horror film that's ever picked, but in recent memory, at least in the past few decades, it is the only horror film to have won Best Picture. But yeah, this is a great film. Hopkins, obviously, as Lecter, is absolutely menacing, absolutely sinister, and he gives an excellent performance in this film. And this overall is just a really thrilling crime mystery type film, and is a pretty unsettling film overall, especially that like third act sequence with Jodie Foster and the whole like night vision thing. That is a wonderfully directed scene. One of the most thrilling scenes I've ever seen. And yeah, great film. If I had to rate it, I'd probably give it a strong 9, like a 9.5 as well. Fantastic film, fantastic horror film. Well, I guess not fully a horror film, but it's like a horror crime drama mystery thriller kind of thing. All right, so we're at number 1, guys. There's only one left, so you guys already know what it is. So number 1 is American Beauty, which stars Kevin Spacey as a weird pedophile, and so he just basically plays himself in this film. But here's the thing, guys. I actually had never seen American Beauty up until this point. American Beauty is a film that, like, I didn't have any, like, I wasn't put in any kind of bias to want to really like this film, because I watched this film like post Kevin Spacey allegations. So me going into this film, I was like, okay, I know that a lot of people have been saying that this film didn't age well because of everything that has come out about Kevin Spacey, but I'm sorry, like, he is great in this film. And yeah, even though it's a bit off-putting and weird because of everything that's come out, there's no denying that the dude is talented, and he is one of the more talented actors that we have. I mean, it's unfortunate that he's a sicko, but can't deny the fact that he is really able to embody characters in ways that a lot of actors can't. And he just has this kind of charisma that is really hard to beat. And even beyond Kevin Spacey's performance, I think the direction by Sam Mendes is fantastic. It's creative. I love the way the score is used in this film, because at first when the score was playing like in the first act or so, I was like, okay, this sounds kind of like it just came from a database or something. It doesn't really sound like there's much creativity behind it. But as the film went along, there's certain scenes where the cinematography and the imagery and the score just really match in this really artistic way that I thought was really, really creative and was really immersive. And, you know, just beyond that, like, this is just a really hilarious film too. This film, essentially from start to finish, is a laugh riot. And I just think the comedy is really woven throughout this film in a really clever way. And yeah, in the third act too, like the ending in the third act, I think is brilliantly done. And again, like, this is one of those films that won Best Picture along with like a film like The Silence of the Lambs, that didn't really feel like it was crafted just to win awards. Like, maybe there's people that'll disagree with that, but given like the content that's in this film and given like how it's directed, maybe like the bag scene, you know, the bag floating in the wind scene that seems to make or break people. Sure, that one seems to be kind of reaching for those Oscar awards, but that being said, I still think that scene is overall it's effective. Like, I don't think it's like a masterpiece scene, but I think it's a really, really well directed scene, and it was effective overall. And this whole film is just, I think, really, really well directed. I think Sam Mendes is a pretty damn great director. I really enjoyed 1917, and I know some people think it's overrated and don't like it, but I actually really enjoyed 1917. But either way, yeah, American Beauty, really funny, really dramatic, and really thematic too. Yeah, I think this is just a really, really fantastic film, and I could see myself watching this film a lot. Like, I feel like I can come back to this film at really any point and just find a lot of enjoyment in it. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Carlos, for giving your 5-1. My number 5 is Shakespeare in Love, which Carlos obviously really loves, as well as all of Letterboxd. I'm kidding, obviously. So Shakespeare in Love is a movie that a lot of people don't like. In fact, when I went into this movie, I thought I was going to hate it. It was like, what, 6 years ago when I first saw it, because I'd seen Saving Private Ryan, and I loved that movie. And I watched Shakespeare in Love, and I was like, I want to hate this movie, but it's so charming. It's so beautiful, honestly. It's so well shot. You know, it's so fast paced. Like, I'm never bored by this movie. I really am not. And it's funny because I always, again, I reviewed this movie all those years ago. This was always a movie that I said was just good, but I would always come back to it. Like, Saving Private Ryan, I've only seen twice. This movie, I hate to say it, but I've seen like a dozen times. And I feel like the reason why I come back to it so much is because it's a movie that not only is digestible in its approach, but it's about the arts. It's about the theater and the creative process. And I do like movies about that, but also that mixed with the romance as well as a period piece. It's a good mix for me. The comedy works for me. I love the score. The score is one of my favorite romance scores. I also really loved the pacing. Again, the way everything flows together, and how all the pieces fit. There's just something about it that really works. And I'm someone that, I like period pieces, but there are many where I'm just kind of like, that's just okay, or that's solid. But I do like Shakespeare in Love. Should it have won Best Picture? No, I do think that The Thin Red Line should have won, but I still like Shakespeare in Love. What can I say? I really like this movie. It's a very enjoyable movie. That's why it's my number 5. My number 4 is one of my all-time favorite Westerns, or should I say anti-Westerns. My number 4 is Unforgiven, which obviously only on 4K, it's a true marvel to behold. It's a movie that is simple, but again, in its approach, it's what makes you fully realize that this is a gripping, intense, meditative film that really makes you think. And I feel like Clint Eastwood, of all people, him directing this movie is really, really good. Because he's someone that you knew as someone that did Westerns. So to see him dissect the genre and just pick it apart piece by piece, and then also say, hey, these are a lot of negatives about what was going on during this time period. I think that it says something. I think that this is a movie that you watch it more and more, and you really do pick up on so many things. There's not that much action, which I really appreciate. I love shootout scenes in Western movies, don't get me wrong, I grew up with Westerns, but I also appreciate when there isn't that much violence, and when there are, it's really impactful. And I feel like the movie Drive, again, it's going to be a reach in the dark for many people, but I feel like the movie Drive kind of took from Unforgiven in that approach, where Drive kind of, gets you all cuddled up, and Unforgiven gets you all cuddled up too, where it's like, okay, things are kind of fine right now, and then all of a sudden there's a burst of violence, and it impacts you because of how sudden it is. And I really liked the approach that Unforgiven did. I think it's one of the best movies of the 1990s, and honestly, one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a perfect movie, in my opinion. So that's my number 4. My number 3 is The Silence of the Lambs. I love this movie. I'm just going to say it right now. My top 4 movies, this was the hardest thing I think ever for me to do in terms of doing this whole Best Picture ranking. I would spend days on end trying to decide where I was going to rank them. And I decided to rank this as number 3 because I think that the same way that Unforgiven is a breakthrough in the Western genre, this is a breakthrough in the horror genre. A female lead character that, you know, doesn't really do dumb decisions. In fact, she's very, very smart. This is something that was unheard of during this time period. And, you know, there were so many movies that almost kind of try to force that there's like a female lead, but this is a movie that does it so naturally. There's so many subtle details that showcase the sexism that was going on during this time period, and still to this day. And I feel like those subtle details are what makes people like myself that rewatch it multiple times appreciate it more and more. More importantly, this is a filmmaking that really knows what they're doing. I mean, the filmmaking is incredible. You know, the cinematography, the way it's shot, it's a lot of close-ups, perspective shots. The score, it's very haunting. The relationships are very well developed. It's a flawless movie. It's a movie that gets better and better with each viewing. It never gets old, and it's held up very well. And I would highly recommend, if you do want to own like a physical copy, buy the Criterion. As someone that owns the old Blu-ray and then decided to pick this up, this is a lot better. Criterion did an amazing job. And yeah, this movie holds up so very well all these years later, and it's one of my all-time favorite movies. That's why it's my number 3. So that's my number 3, obviously. My number 2, my number 1 and 2, I'm not gonna lie, it was very difficult. Even more so than obviously my 1 to 4, because I know I already said that. But you know, choosing 1 and 2, it's kind of like, okay, well, 1 I enjoy, 1 I've seen many, many, many more times, and overall I decided to go with that as my number 1. But my number 2 is still an amazing movie, and it's high up on my list in terms of favorite movies of all time. My number 2 is Schindler's List. This movie is a knockout gut punch to the stomach. You know, it's a movie that you're not going to be able to see yourself watching many, many times, but the times where you decide to pick out the Blu-ray and put it in the 4K player, it's impactful, man. It really is. It's a movie that I can't see get old. I can't see it. I can see this movie age like a fine wine. This is a movie that people decide to watch once a year just as a reminder with what happened 80 years ago. You know, it's a film experience like almost no other. I mean, Steven Spielberg really went out of his comfort zone, and I'm so glad that he did, because he created something that is just so genuine. Like, you watch this movie, you don't feel like this is a Spielberg movie. You don't, because he does such a great job of disguising and almost doing something completely different than what he's used to. And that to me is really admirable, because so many directors, you know, they'll go in their own wheelhouse of like, oh, this genre. But Spielberg went out of his comfort zone, and he created an incredible movie that is easily one of the best movies ever made. So that's my number 2. My number 1, you probably guessed it already. Currently my favorite movie of all time. Who knows, that might change. Because at one point my favorite movie was Shawshank Redemption. That's obviously changed. But my number 1 is American Beauty. Look, I know Kevin Spacey, you know, with everything, all the allegations and everything, I know that, you know, that's still in everyone's mind. But listen, what Kevin Spacey does in this movie is truly amazing. Actually, every actor and actress, they do an amazing job with their performances. The story is engaging. The pacing is perfect. This is a perfect example of a comedy meets drama that is blended so well together and so perfectly paced in its approach to all that. Tonally, it's a perfect movie. Cinematography is amazing, although I do wish that this would come out in 4K, because I feel like it would look even better. The score by Thomas Newman is just very, very delicate, and more importantly, very well scored. The emotions, the ending, everything that you can want in a movie is in this movie. It's edgy, you know, with its themes and everything. This is a movie that couldn't be made today, obviously, but it's a movie that did get made, and I'm so glad that it did. Overall, in terms of perfect structure of movies, I think that this is a perfect structure of a movie of 3-act structure, done very well. And that's why it's my favorite movie of all time. Again, as of right now.
That's it. That's my ranked list of the 90s Best Picture winners. And I hope you guys found enjoyment in this. It's not something that I normally do, especially with a collab. But I hope you guys found it entertaining and found it enjoyable. Well, it looks like me and Chad actually had some agreements when it comes to the top 5. Obviously, huge disagreement when it comes to Shakespeare in Love. I don't know how anybody can find enjoyment in that film, but hey, I don't wish bad movie experiences upon anybody. So either way, if you guys are new to this channel, if you're watching this on Chad's channel, I just want to say I really appreciate you sitting through this and caring to watch my ranked list. And if you want to become an official Kino Lord, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I've got a lot of analysis and explain videos on that channel as well. And I'm always doing reviews of more lesser known independent type films. Right now I'm doing a lot of horror and a lot of more like disturbing films. And I do have a Patreon to where if you become a $1 patron, you can vote on these weekly polls that I put up. And you'll have some voting power on the channel. So I take in all requests whether or not you're a patron. But if you're a patron, you can actually vote on these films and sometimes single-handedly decide what I review next. So if that's something that you want to be a part of, feel free to join as a $1 patron. If you want to become a higher patron, that's awesome. I have more perks there for you. But yeah, with that, that's I guess that's all I'll say. Again, huge thanks to Chad. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to collab with you, bud. And I really thank everybody for watching this and hearing what I had to say and caring about my bullshit opinions. So appreciate it, guys.
So guys, that is my 1990s Academy Award Best Picture winners, ranked from worst to best. I really appreciate Carlos from Misfit for coming on. You are the best. I'm also going to be having Sergey of Skynet Gen. He'll be coming on to do the 2000s Academy Award Best Picture winners ranked. And then Larry from LC Screen Talk will be doing the 2010s ranked worst to best with me. So again, guys, thank you very much for watching. Go to Mr. Pon's channel. Don't forget the subscription notification bell for him, as well as myself if this is your first time viewer. And I will catch you guys later.